So, Chapter 20, Something Else Unexpected. "Let's go, Dilly," I called back to her from a meadow. With a swift bark and a grin, Dilly loped after me. As we walked along, I suddenly made a decision. I needed to track down one last clue. I'd learned that no one who lived near Mrs. Ely had gotten sick, but what about her niece? I should find out if anyone else in her neighborhood had been struck with the cholera. It would be, I thought, the final proof. It was only an extra couple of miles out of my way to Islington. That wasn't much for me. I'd grown up walking across London. Except for the time we took Pa to the burial ground, I'd never ridden in a hansom cab or one of those new horse-drawn omnibuses. When we buried Mum, we walked, Henry being older then, and Fish-Eye Bill being too stingy to pay for a cab. "We'll go," I told Dilly, "and after that we'll stop to see Henry for a few minutes. Henry was so lonely the other day. Besides, he's never met you. You'd better be on your best behavior for Mrs. Miggle. She's like Mrs. Weatherburn, only worse." I could still do all this and be back at Berwick Street before dark to check on Florrie, and I'd have a lot to tell her, and thank her for, too. For, in a way, it was Florrie who'd led me to the proof we needed. If Gus hadn't come by to visit her that morning, I might never have discovered the unexpected case. Even without my knowing her name, it didn't take me long to track down Mrs. Ely's niece. All I had to say was, "I'm looking for a lady that died of the cholera last week." The second person I asked sent me to a street where one house had a laurel wreath on the door tied up in black crape and the window shades drawn. I went to the back and knocked. A sturdy woman dressed in mourning black opened the door. I'm going to stop for a moment. You may have noticed that when Eel goes to visit these people at their houses, when he's not there in the Broad Street neighborhood, he goes to the back door. And that's because that's the servants' entrance and the tradespeople's entrance. And he's in a different social class than these people who have these houses of their own. So he goes to the back door and he talks to the servants. So it's just something to keep in mind. So I went to the back door and knocked. A sturdy woman dressed in mourning black opened the door. "Excuse me, but today I saw Polly, who works in Mrs. Ely's house," I began, pulling off my cap. "She mentioned your recent trouble. I thought you might have some messages to be run." "You're too late, lad," the servant answered. "The mistress was buried yesterday. We sent the funeral notices out by post, although we could have used help to deliver some by hand." "I'm sorry, ma'am," I replied. "Did your mistress get struck down the same as Mrs. Ely, then?" She nodded. "And I don't mind telling you that the rest of us in the household feared for our lives. Mistress went away on Thursday night to take dinner with her aunt, as healthy as could be. She came back Friday, and then took sick." She sniffed noisily. "By Saturday afternoon, bless her sweet soul, she was lying in a coffin. She leaves two boys, younger than you." "I'm sorry to hear it," I said. I took a breath. Now for the question that mattered. "Can you tell me, has the cholera afflicted anyone else in this neighborhood?" I waited for her answer, my heart beating hard, but I wasn't surprised when I heard it. "Oh dear, no. This is a healthy part of Islington. Why, I don't know that I've ever heard of the cholera being in these streets. At least not in my time," she replied, dabbing her cheeks with her handkerchief. She stopped to blow her nose. "No, it's a tragic mystery indeed that both aunt and niece were carried off in this way. I don't suppose we will ever know why." I thanked her and I left. The woman was wrong, I thought. We know exactly why they died. They both drank water from the Broad Street pump. I walked quickly towards Mrs. Miggle's lodging house, which sat on the edge of a crowded neighborhood. I'd given Henry strict instructions to always walk straight home from school and not wander around. "Make yourself invisible," I'd told him many times. "Fish-Eye Bill Tyler favors working in the Borough or the Seven Dials, and criminals like to keep to their own territories. so I don't expect him to be snooping around here. Still, you can't be too careful. But forgetting that was exactly the mistake I made that sunny afternoon. I was so eager to boast to my little brother about my new job helping a great doctor. I was already thinking ahead to telling Florrie about solving the mystery. In short, I was so full of myself, I forgot to be cautious. I forgot about Fish-Eye Bill, but he hadn't forgotten me. He was like an octopus, his long tentacles reaching out over the hidden nooks and crannies of London. When I heard the clop of hooves stop close behind me, I didn't turn around. There were cabs everywhere on the streets. Then came the sound of footsteps behind me, but I didn't notice in time. Instead, I was deep into imagining the moments of triumph Dr. Snow and I would have before the committee. Would he, I wonder, call on me to give the evidence I'd found today? No, that would be too much to ask. But he might at least turn and smile at me. That would be enough. One minute, the hazy yellow sky was ahead of me. The next, I was clawing at my face, trying to breathe under a foul-smelling hand. I bit down hard and kicked and flailed, but I was picked up and carried back to the cab, then thrown inside like a sack of onions. Suddenly, I realized I knew the smell that enveloped me. It was the smell of fish. And that was the last thought I had before something knocked onto my head so hard everything went black. I awoke to a rocky to-and-fro motion that made my stomach lurch. It took me a minute to piece together fragments of what I was feeling. A pounding in my head, the rocking motion of a horse, a cord digging into my wrists, a kerchief over my eyes, and, most of all, the smell. Slowly, my brain linked one sensation to the next, and then the next. It was a bit like a piecework quilt I'd once watched my mum put together. The pattern didn't make sense right away. Not until you could see all the pieces. Finally, I figured it out. I was in a hansom cab, pulled by a single horse clopping over the cobblestones, on my way to who know where. I had been spotted and grabbed the one time when my guard was down. I had been kidnapped by my stepfather. How had this happened? Fish-Eye Bill couldn't have been following me. It was just a horrible coincidence. I cursed my bad luck. At least I could be grateful that he'd picked me up before I'd gotten to Mrs. Miggles' lodging house. Though what Fish-Eye Bill was doing riding a cab like a swell was beyond me. He must have just done a job, I thought. Housebreaking, perhaps, in some nice Islington neighborhood. And then, all out of the blue, he'd been given a present. Me. Now, as we bumped along, I tried to get my bearings. It would help to know where he was taking me. I concentrated hard, hoping to catch a familiar sound. A church bell, a boat on the Thames, the crush of traffic at Piccadilly Circus. Then I remembered Dilly. She must be wandering alone, scared and confused. The city was a cruel place for a dog. Dilly, like so many of my friends on Broad Street this past week, was probably lost for good. After a while, the cab stopped and the door opened. "Don't play dead, boy," came Fish-Eye's voice out of the thick heat. "I can tell you're awake. Now look sharp. We have some catching up to do. Get down." I didn't move. Suddenly, I felt a sharp kick in my ribs. Ow! Fish-Eye pulled me down from the cab and dragged me along for a few steps. I heard a door open and he pushed me forward. "Walk up them stairs," he ordered. "I ain't carrying you." I stumbled up best I could. The stairwell smelled like a sewer. At the top, he pushed me into a dank room and threw me into a chair. "Don't move." He reached around and took the blindfold off. "Where are we?" I asked. Fish-Eye just laughed. "You're home, Ed. Home with your daddy." I frowned. This dirty room could be anywhere. I should have been able to tell if the cab had crossed into Southwark over the Thames. I would have smelled the oily brown river when we passed over. I would have heard the boats. Or had that happened when I was knocked out cold? I didn't know. I felt dizzy and like I might be sick, but I couldn't let that stop me. I had to pay more attention now, no matter what happened, or no matter how much my head hurt. I won't tell you anything, I said. Why can't you just leave me alone? I'm nothing to you. Oh, my dear boy, you surprise me, said Fish-Eye. What kind of stepfather would I be to leave two young boys to fend for themselves in London, crawling as it is with criminals and thieves? I'm just trouble to you, I pointed out. I won't steal for you. I'll just run away again. Or worse, I'll turn you in. He laughed. I doubt that. But you see, lad, it's not you I want. I clenched my fists and half rose in the chair. Yes, you know exactly what I mean, don't you? Fish-Eye smirked. I want your little brother, because what brings in more tin than a small, delicate boy with great round eyes? He takes after your dearly departed mum, don't he? Fish-Eye went on. Henry don't look at all like the usual street urchin. No, he's what you might call adorable. Just the sort of boy to soften a lady's heart and make her open her purse. Begging? He wanted to turn Henry into a beggar, and when the takings were slow, he'd want him to be a pickpocket, too. So tell me, Eel, growled Fish-Eye, where have you got him stashed? He paused and blew his foul breath into my face. Where is Henry?